Okay.
He's a great editor.
I love this cat, man.
He is amazing. He can just get it that thin. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Marla.
How are you?
I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
Oh, you're amazing. How did it go last night when you went to that show?
Well, it was, again, I had a couple hours to kill before, so I wound up in a pub, and I was watching the Yankee game. And, that's one of the things, like, before the actual engagement of the music experience, a lot of times this is a lonely journey. I'm not there meeting friends. A lot of my friends, they'll say to me, why don't you just come to New York, then we can all hang. Because it's a communal thing. You tend to go as a social experience. And here I am, I have a very certain amount of missions on these things, create content, obviously get off myself, dance, exercise, see my friends, the bandmates. But it's always that interval of time, the doors open. And then, you secure your spot. And you see all these other heads that are there waiting. And then this young, beautiful finger-picking guy just burning away. It wasn't really my bag of music, but he was just such an infectious dude. He was such a good guy.
This was at the show.
He's the opening act, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they did an opening act, and it was very different than the electric jam music of Circles Around the Sun. So he opened, and yet and then when those guys came out, a good friend of mine, Gary Bartz, who played with Miles Davis and is a decorated saxophonist, lives in Emeryville. He said, we're all human animals, really. The way you look at all the atrocities around the world and the way we treat each other, some are more evolved than others, but I do feel an animalistic side comes out then when the raw, unabashed, when I see my friends, the guys I love, specifically, not everybody in the band, but then I get fired up. And then the spiritual descarga, as I like to put it, the release inside inside my brain starts to go, and I start yelling. I start almost, I wouldn't say I become belligerent. I have a few drinks, but I'm not drunk. I'm having an out-of-body experience.
Wow, man.
It doesn't last the whole show, but at least when I look back at videos, sometimes I say,
wow.
Whoa, either I was just, enveloped in this, but at the same time, I love it because I figured out something about musicians. You go to an acoustic show, it may not be the appropriate setting to be screaming and yelling, but go to an electric jam show, sometimes those guys, most of the time, they don't really know how they sound on stage. They can't necessarily hear exactly. So when they get that kind of raw response back from somebody they at least consider to have street cred as a music journalist, then it fires them up. So you feel like you're completely engaged and ultimately raising collective consciousness. So listen, I woke up this morning. I can't really hear so well, but I had a ball.
When you are in that field that you're talking about, is it intermittent or is it a continuous stream flowing through you when you're reacting to the music? Is it an intermittent reaction?
It's a great question. It happens in, I guess the answer is both. When it comes, it's not fleeting. It goes for minutes at a time. But then after a tune, if I'm really in that raging stage for one tune, if they slow things down, then it might be intermittent and then come back later in the show.
Did you have this when you were a child?
No.
Did you experience this? When did you start experience this kind of activity within yourself?
Not until maybe the last, maybe, I don't know, 5 years of my life.
Ah, yeah, very interesting.
Oh, very. I was almost sedate. Some of the stuff that you've talked to me about, as far as my chart is concerned, I almost feel like it was asleep for a long time.
Wow.
And then it was awakened by, I received the Tao. I don't know if you know the Tao. I'm a Taoist, which is different than Buddhism. But that fundamentally was my first spiritual transmission, and it allowed all the stuff that, the perception and the angst and the stuff that used to hang me up fell away. And it was a deep, deep spiritual transmission that changed my life forever. And then I started to really lock in on music and my peers. But before I would just go and sit. I wasn't, I was definitely like there for the scene or there with my friends. But now I feel like it's just gonzo journalism. I'm trying to carry the torch for Hunter S. Thompson, and I make myself part of the scene, the thing.
What is the Tao? Explain that to your viewers.
Yeah. My concept of the Tao is that it is a way of life. It is not an organized religion. Ultimately, it is a deep journey and an effort to cultivate your true nature. Okay? All the things that you talk about inside of me that I sometimes have conflict with, if you can get rid of that shrouded dharma, then you're cultivating and you're being really true to the Tao.
And you're being really true by the journey that you're on right now with the musicians, because you're actually able to bring that out a little bit, I think. Now sitting here talking to you, I can see that in their facial expressions and the way they treat me, and the fact that the bass player Dan Horn last night comes out, gives me a fist bump, before the gig. So there's an entity there. It's a source of light in a dark time, a very big source of light, and doing it unconditionally. I'm not asking these guys to they get me a free ticket for the show, which is great. Don't get me wrong. It's always, but I don't do it for the status or the groupie. I'm never there at the end of the show hanging. I never want to hang out. I'm there I'm just there to heal. And you're right. This is a Taoist journey. It is not a monetary scheme. There's no monetization going. Again, the book coming out, it has potential to do some to really, it'll be very therapeutic in many ways. And
but
what is the name of your book?
The book is called The Cats, Volume 1.
I love that.
On the Bandstand of Life with Master Musicians. That's it, by Jake Feinberg.
I love that.
You are going to love this book beyond even, because it's tapping into all this, it's in many ways it's tapping into the spiritual side of music. We're not talking about scales or, we're not getting deep in the weeds of theory. Inevitably, though, a lot of it does come back to theory and feel. Because ultimately, if the music feels good, then it's going to be good. Then it's good.
And it's a way to communicate with groups of consciousness that are out there listening to the music, because when the music is being put out there, the recipients of the sound are actually
actually,
it.
my philosophy is, Michael Shreve is a good friend of mine, who's the drummer for Carlos Santana, for better or for worse. His solo at Woodstock was captured on TV when he was 19, and he became a star. And he kind of lived in that shadow, unfortunately. For better or for worse, I asked him about that question when we did our Woodstock 50th. But he said to me, he goes, "How do you expect?" When in one of our radio interviews, he goes, "How do you expect the audience to go there if the musicians don't go there first?" Meaning, collective consciousness. Okay. And I get and that is tried and true. But I say to myself, you know what? I want to get there much quicker. And how do you do that? I'm already there. I'm going to go there first as an audience member and raise them up so that they are so fired up that they are out of their original mindset and they're jumping out of their chair. That's what was going on last night. The keyboardist was he was on fire. He was jumping in his seat. Like Champlin, it was and he has the chops, and he plays like Champ, he's like that. And they're gone. And at that point, so actually, I expect the audience to go there first. I don't put
in anticipation, right?
I just do it the reverse. I say, I'm going to bring an urgency. I equate it to any fourth quarter of a football game, and I'm going to come off the blind side and try to sack the quarterback. And I have a huge 300-pound dude that I have to get around, and I'm going to need all the strength in the world. And that's how I bring it to it. There's no...
That's true, Jake. That's true. I see it also in you.
Well, but, you know, and even last night, I mean, I was right in front of the monitors, and I had my ring on, my gold ring on, and I was playing rhythm to the. Well, at one point, William Tyler, he knew I had not met him before, but he was looking over at me because I was fired. He was blowing my mind open, and then he said, "There's one tune I play." He was telling the audience, he's like, "That would be considered a dance song. It's a jig," and I just started to play what I thought was a beat pattern to it. And at the end of the song, he looks. I mean, this is, you know, he looks over. He's like, "Yeah, nice job," you know. And then at one point, I was playing like the hypnotic patterns of the circles around the sun, and this woman's like, "Can you?" It's just so San Francisco. She's like older hippie. She's like, "Can you not hit with that ring, you know, with your ring on the," because it was making like a it was like a percussive sound, you know, and I was totally in beat. It wasn't like I was like flailing around, but yeah, I'm just trying to let the body dance.
Next time somebody does that to you, just say, "I'm part of the band."
Believe me, I've had and one of the explorations on the Jake Feinberg show, and I tell you this now, even though it's not explored in the book per se, is how the significance of music has changed in our culture. And I'm thinking I might have even talked to you about this in our radio interview, but, you know, I have had situations where I've just not even playing ambient rhythm, but I've had people in bars, half-filled bars in Mount Hood, Oregon, come up and tap me on the shoulder and say, you know, I'm up in the front of the stage. These guys are playing very avant-garde music. You know, it's not rock. It's just music. And they're like, "Excuse me, you're blocking my view." And I just look around and say, "Why don't you can you just move your chair over a little bit?" You know, we've gotten so, it doesn't matter what kind of music it is. And I don't want to paint with a broad brush because there are plenty of insane festivals with, you know, pit dancing and mosh pits and all this stuff. But I just in general, sometimes I feel like music has become about pacification, more about burning. They don't, especially at the pop level, they don't want you to feel. They want you to tune out. And when you guys were coming of age, pop music was, a lot of it was really righteously amazing because it was being made by human beings. So I look at it now, I say, what are younger cats doing? They're multitasking when they listen to music. They're not locked in on it in a spiritual way.
Hear you.
Okay?
Hear you.
It's almost in the background. It's not made to numb you, but with the quantized rhythm now of the drum machine, kids don't even know. My daughters do because we listen to everything, and it's wide open. And you know, they listen to everything from live Grateful Dead to Lionel Hampton to everyone. Okay, I mean, just burning.
That is such a great point. What you just made, you are so right on.
Quantized. It's when it's quantized like this. Then what happens? I mean, at the
formulized. Hollywood's formula, LA's formula,
right.
New York's formula. I get it. Yeah.
Well, you know,
I love that you're bringing this up.
I don't approve of his behavior, and he is a scumbag, and he deserves. I was gonna say I did 2 hours of interviews with Bill Cosby before the world caved in on him, and when nobody knows this really, but when he started to open for Ramblin' Jack Elliott, because Ramblin' Jack found him at a bar in Philadelphia and brought him up and said, "You can open for me at the Gaslight."
Cool.
And
I saw that a little bit.
Right. Okay. So, but Cosby was obsessed with spiritual jazz, and so he would take Camille, at the time was his girlfriend, after his gigs, would take her to the Village Gate, places like that, to go see Coltrane play. Mm-hmm. And he told me, he goes, you know, in our first interview, he goes, I could put a blindfold on, and you could put on any Blue Note record, and I could tell you who was drumming on it, whether it was Mickey Roker or Tony Williams or Pete LaRocca.
Wow.
Okay, so everybody had their own individual sound on the drums because of the heartbeat, because of the metabolism. Yes. But you lose all that individuality when you have the quantized rhythm. Right. And now I'm talking to, again, the musicians have made me smart, but I'm talking to iconic drummers who essentially are in one room, and they hear somebody playing, they hear something, they hear drum beats in another room, and they say, "That's got to be a machine." And they walk in, and it's a human being playing machine parts. The overarching part of it is that's why I really started my show, because if you have this kind of homogenization of sound and music, and that carries over society, and you start to have this sort of cult think or group think, and you can't differentiate between human and non-human, then ultimately that's how you get another Hitler.
Whoa, that's great. I'm so glad that you are saying this because I agree.
Well, that's why I started. That's why I did my show. If you really want to, and I'm here now in your house.
Yes.
And people would call me an alarmist or but I'm just doing it.
Not.
I'm doing I'm doing my part to try to push back against that.
You're amazing. It's like you're on this incredible adventure all the time. You have that ability for some reason.
I don't. Well, that the Tao has helped me continue on that frequency. You know, that Stanley Clark told me that. He said when you can operate, it's not a physical thing. It's not a tangible thing. But when you can operate on that frequency, and he was talking about playing certain type of music, spiritual music, doesn't matter what it is. But yeah, I seem to access that, and then a lot of magic occurs because of that too.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit, just a little bit. I want to hear about your parents a little bit. What was that like growing up with them? What? Because you are obviously different in so many ways, and you are doing a great service to musicians. I'm sorry, but you are. And so, how did you grow up? What was your growing up situation like?
Well, I mean, it was very untraditional. My parents were the type of, just as an example, I mean, I used to go to my friends' houses and, you know, their parents, this was in the early 80s and very different times. And, you know, there were some parents, you know, you'd walk in and they really liked to be called, you know, Mr. Smith or Mr. Jackson, you know. And my parents, every time, from the time I was just in kindergarten, I mean, my friends would come over and say, "Hey, thanks, Mrs. Feinberg," and she'd go, "Oh, just call me Sandy." Aww. Okay, so there was no formalities. They were not. I mean, almost to the extreme. They weren't. This is the difference. They were conservative in their own way. They didn't spoil me, but they emboldened me as a child to just be like anybody else. So there was never a kids' table. Okay. A lot of times, for better or for worse, I was entertaining the adults at an early age, you know, just making wry comments. Some people might say they were snarky comments, you know, but making people laugh and sort of. So I had this. I learned early on that to interact with people that were older than me, and to really engage them in which is primarily what I've done on my journey, is connect with authentically with older women and men, musicians.
Musicians, yeah.
So it was always very open. It was the most loving, safe, generous environment any kid could grow up in. It did have its detriments in the long run, because some of the lack of
learning how to compete, maybe?
Yeah, or not, or, you know, like playing sports. I was a good baseball player, but very susceptible to, you know, even as a young kid. I mean, there was a coach. It was different times, but it was a coach who was just kind of a jackass. He was just he was like, you know, like you'd bobble the ball in the infield, and he'd be like, "What the hell is wrong?" You know, he'd be yelling at you.
Yeah.
His son had a stuttering problem. Like, you know, he was just an asshole. And I told my dad. I came home I was like really upset. In second grade, I said, "I don't want to play." I think I was in second. I don't know. Yeah, I was like, "I don't want to play baseball anymore. This guy's mean."
Yeah, I hear you.
A lot of fathers would have said, "Suck it up, deal with it. He's, you know, go play baseball. Go play." My dad was on the phone with this guy, basically saying Jake doesn't want to play with, you know, he's really upset with. Now this is my dad on the phone with the coach, advocating for me, and some people would say empowering me, but the truth, he was an asshole. But he was. The point is, the guy said, "Oh my God, I feel horrible. I don't want Jake to quit. We need him on the team. He's an important part of the team." And I stayed.
Good for you.
But I did struggle with criticism because I was not thrown into situations like a lot of people are. So for a long time, I resented it because I could feel, or I always looked at myself as coming up short as a man in society, progressing in any kind of. This is in my 20s, and I really took it out on my parents. I didn't blame them, but I I looked at it as that's why I am the way I am.
I know. All kids do that, Jake. All kids do that.
All I can say is now,
Yeah.
with my daughters, them being grandparents, we have, knock on wood, they are in their early 70s, and they are incredibly healthy. And in fact, my ex wife last year sort of had a midlife crisis, and after we divorced, she abruptly left Tucson and moved to New Jersey. And I don't know what she was in a delusional state, but she told me, she looked at me, she goes, I think the girls should come live with me. I think it'll be better. I said, they're not going anywhere. They are my daughters.
Oh my goodness gracious!
All right, I said, don't you even? I said, you do what you need to do. You're out of your mind. These are, what are you thinking? So she split, and I stayed and all last year. But who stepped up to help me? My parents.
Of course.
They flew out once a month so I could go on these journeys and get stuff out of my system and keep sane, because it was a heavy lift.
Yes. Yes.
And so they continue to this day to be this supportive people.
And what are your daughters' names?
They're both palindromes, Hannah and Asia. Asia, like the Steely Dan album, the song.
Yeah. And how old are they?
14 and 7.
Oh my Lord, you got a teenager. God help you and God bless you.
Well, she's not even there yet, and it's
no offense, but yes.
Yeah, no, Hannah, bless her, is so far beyond her mother and I. It is ridiculous.
Yes.
I mean, she is so gifted in so many ways. I'm basically trying to stay out of her way, but I will say that when she really got shaken to her core last year when her mom split.
Yeah. Yeah.
And rightfully so. And that's where the warrior mentality came in.
Yeah.
At that point, it was like, no, I'm not going to crumble. I'm going to stay here and pick up the pieces, and actually they're going to flourish. So and their mom has subsequently moved. Their mom came to her. She moved back, and now we're back to sort of 50-50 the way we were, and it's really good for the girls to have their mother.
Oh God, yes.
So I mean, it was a brazen move, but both girls are incredibly inspiring, and they both are completely, like, when I saw that I could be partially responsible for creating human beings like that, it really gave me incentive to say, well, what else can I do? Like, what else can I? Creativity started to spawn. I'd say that's when it kind of started.
Inspiration.
Big time.
Yeah. But then you have that ability to inspire other people. Mm-hmm. And in the interviews that I've noticed that you have done with a lot of the musicians that you've worked with, what I've noticed about you is that you're inspiring, and you're inspiring by leaving it open, by allowing them to share, by allowing them to go off in avenues sometimes that may be a little bit different. And I really respect that. I think you're a great interviewer. And how did that process start with you? How did you decide, I'm going to be an interviewer now? How did that happen?
It's like one of these things, like Hags, Terry Haggerty. I love him so much.
He's pretty cool.
He's a cool cat, and we've done a bunch of interviews, and he always talks to me about. He says, people come up to him and say, "How did you do that?" And he goes, "I have no idea." Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And I would say that there's some of that at work. In my best moment, like in my interviewing moments, it's not. It's just something where Barry Melton could say something about. We could be talking about the blind dates, right? Mm-hmm. Let's just say in the Chinese restaurant today, and we're live on Facebook, and there's some sort of thing there where I'm still sort of hooked into the numbers and like how many people are tuning in, the comments, but still I'm really focused on the and he could be talking about that experience, and then he could say something like. What's interesting is that right before I saw them, I was with Allen Ginsberg performing at this daycare center, right? So even he might be leading up to a story about that concert with the blind dates, but the minute he says Ginsberg, I'm going to say, what's your experience? When was the first time you met Ginsberg? Boom, he's out there.
Exactly.
So a lot of times what I notice with musicians who are familiar with my work, they realize they need to finish stories sometimes, because we wind up sometimes, we'll get back around to it, but we're off on many threads. So it's a compelling conversation. And if you either know the person it is a very different style, because it's not like, please tell me about your recent album. There's nobody feeding me questions to have to ask these guys. It's a stream of consciousness. So if somebody's going to bring up a beat poet like Cassidy or Kerouac, and they had an experience with them, I don't care what story they're talking about. I want them to talk about that. Or when, Barry Melton riffed on seeing Charles Mingus flat. He was dead broke at the end of his career on the Divisadero at the Both And Club. He goes, "Is this how we treat our geniuses in this country?" He goes, "It's a heartbreaker." And that's the kind of stuff. And then it's talking to David Lindley, who, I don't know if you know Lindley, wizard of string instruments. Me and him have done 4 hours of interviews. He's known as a folk artist. He does play electric music, but a wizard of string instruments. Who would have thought that he was, you get him talking about Charles Mingus. And the fact that when he was 10 years old, he's like, I want to try to, he's like, I want to try to play the upright bass. They're like, you're too small. He's like, I'll sit on a stool.
I love it.
That's in my book. Yeah. Who would ever connect Lindley to Mingus, upright bass? So it's also about discovering new information, things that people didn't know before.
And therefore, they'll listen. And because of the way that it's put together and the different avenues that you go down, and you'll be able to connect those avenues in a new way, they aren't dead to it. They'll listen to what you have to say.
It's funny you bring it up, because yesterday...
You're fascinating. I'm sorry.
Well, it is... I think people have to step back and say, I thought I knew everything about something and I didn't. And it's like...
And it's how you present it.
Exactly. It's very... It's not ostentatious. I let that person reveal it.
And how does the passion? I see such passion.
Because I know that I'm doing something that is. It's because of what I've always dreamed of, is finding my niche, finding my purpose.
Yeah.
I found my purpose in life at 41.
It's wonderful.
So some people wait their whole lives and they never find their purpose, and I have. Tony Orlando. You say what you want about his politics. We did in a most epic interview. A typical Jake Feinberg, like a Johnny Mathis interview, where you're talking about all this stuff. And Orlando's like, Jake, at 30, at the time I was 30, he goes, you have a very big heart. He's like, you are Santa Claus for those who are craving. It's on the back of the book.
For those who need to be heard.
He goes, you are Santa Claus. You're bringing gifts to people.
Yes.
Including my guests. It's not something that's being self-serving for me. Some people do get upset with me because, I'm trying to make a living. I'm trying to get people to become members of my show. So I'll attach a link to my membership page once in a while on a forum, or if I transcribe an excerpt. But the thing that's so invigorating for me is that I know I have an opportunity to create original content every single day of my life. It doesn't matter if it's...
I love you for this. I just do.
It's all I have. I'm not going to... Listen, I am not going to ever measure my... I'm not going to measure my success as a human being based on on monetization, which seems to be what everybody does now. To me, it's about inspiration, pushing people out of their comfort zone, respect, and love. That's it.
And that is what your parents gave you too when you were young.
Big time.
And allowed you to grow in a way that you wanted to grow in. And I love that. And I love that your dad stood up for you too. And he did the right thing.
My dad is my biggest supporter. He also is... not by any means an alpha male kind of guy, but when it,
I love it.
He's a great, they're rooting for me, and they hear from their friends who are on Facebook about the work that I'm doing. They're not on, and they're not. Yeah. They don't get they don't even know where any of this stuff came from, because I was really a sports fanatic for so long.
Yeah.
And I did baseball on the radio for a minute.
But what was the difference of that for you? Talk to me about the difference between those two genres, music and sports.
It's a great question. I mean, the thing for me is the conversation in music is essential. I don't want to see somebody up there wanking it and just it's about me, or there's a lead player and everybody else is accompanying him. I want to hear true musical conversation. And the same thing plays out in a baseball game where, you know, you look at somebody turning a double play, you know, that involves somebody catching the ball, throwing it to a base, somebody catching it, getting out of the way of a sliding runner, throwing to first base, completing the double play. So there's a lot of strategy involved. You know, there's a conversation, there's a flow. I used to just love the personalities of the game before steroids, before corporatization. You know, you had guys that were working second jobs. You had guys that looked like me, like just tubby dudes that were just like, playing baseball. And, it was just, and there was just a lot of strategy. And I think that on my journey, the conversations themselves are very free-flowing, but there is strategy involved too.
One of the things that I've noticed about you is that you express the need to stay in the now. Explain that to me.
Well, for so much of my life, I persecuted myself for being a failure. In my 20s, I just felt like I was coming up short in every area of my life, and that's why God has obviously at certain times come in, brought people into my life at certain times to, I don't want to say prove my self-worth, but keep me on the path. What was your question?
It seems that one of the things that you express, at least to me, several times, of staying in the now moment.
So it was always about anticipating.
There it was. You were just in the now, man. I love it. You just did what I asked. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, I got a lot. I mean, I hate, but
in the moment.
So it was always about part of my parents' issue. The one thing they did, they were like obsessive planners. Right. I mean, they were both like, and they were both of service. I mean, my mom was the director of the 5th largest public library in New York. My dad was a reference librarian at SUNY Stony Brook. So they lived through the golden era of public service. I mean, they were getting raises every year. Nobody was getting rich, but they were really treated like, not like now, where you go into a public sector job and there's no health insurance and, maybe you're getting 20 hours, whatever. It was just... You
were worthwhile to
you were
to everyone.
respected. Yes. It was a profession. So, so, but they planned obsessively. My mom was planning play dates for me on Saturdays. It was always, we were talking about at breakfast about what we were going to have for dinner. But that led to anxiety about, the future. Why am I not moving? I need to control the future. It was angst. For a while, when my brother was born, my parents had some spontaneity. We'd jump in the van with my grandparents and drive across the country. It was obviously a planned out trip, but I mean, there was some kind of, opportunities for spontaneity. As things moved along, it became a very, so in any event, my anxiety lent itself to anticipatory anxiety. Anticipating. What if? But nothing ever materialized. Nothing ever materialized. And I will share it's not really, but I will say, I mean, it fundamentally changed. I will explain this. I mean, even after I got married and my first daughter was born, I still was in that, projection, anticipating what if, and it would cause a lot of consternation. Why have I done this? Why, And then my second daughter, Asia, was born, and she was born with Down syndrome. And it was with that coinciding with the Tao changed me, because that's where the fear, that's where you see me on this glide path now. It's because of Asia. Hannah is an angel in her own right. She inspired me to believe in myself. Asia kept me in the moment.
I love it.
It's unreal. The doctor said to, at the time, my wife. It was a very interesting. The nurse, we went in for an amnio. She said, there's a couple of soft markers that indicate she might have trisomy 20, or the baby might have trisomy. Why don't you come in and we'll do an amnio? Now, that was in October. Due date was February. The nurse got my wife all ready. She said, the doctor will be in soon. And I looked at Yaru at the time and I said, I don't even care. I said, I want four people. I want to have two kids. I want it to be complete. I don't care if she has Down syndrome. I want to have this baby, And my wife was like, yeah, because in the back of our mind too, 98% were like, she's going to be fine, 5 minutes went by, doctor didn't come in. 10 minutes went by, doctor never came in. After 15 minutes, we were like, let's get out of here. If we had the amnio, and the result had come back before the birth, I don't even know, I wouldn't want to think about, my parents would have been in, and this is where, because they're just human animals, they're just non-perfect people, they would have put a huge amount of pressure on us to abort the baby. If we had taken the amnio. But we walked out. Asia was born. The morning after, I'm sleeping on the couch. My wife is in the hospital bed. Asia's in the little incubator, crib, whatever. And our pediatrician came in, and I look over, I open my eyes, and she's just sort of looking at Asia, And she goes, maybe we should do an amnio just to make sure. And I was like, wow. I said, it's on. It's real. This is real. Because you think about the projection. What if my baby's disabled? What if I'm financially broke? What if this? And it can drive you in, it can keep you stuck, right? 2 or 3
I
weeks.
love you so much right now.
No, well,
I just want you to know that.
It's all good, and so 2 weeks later, I'll never forget. It was March in Tucson. It was snowing, and very rare snow day. And our doctor called, and she said, "Can you guys come into the nurse called or whatever?" She said, "Can you guys come into the office today?" I said, "Well, my wife is tired. We're just hanging out with Asia, young baby. Can I just come in?" And she goes, "No, Dr. Cochran wants to see both of you." So she came in. My mother-in-law from Taiwan was there, and we all sat down, and she looked at us and she said, "Asia has Down syndrome." And my wife and her mom, they kind of broke down, crying a little bit. And at that point, I had not yet received the Tao yet, but at that point, something switched inside of me. And I said, game on. I said, you've been worrying your whole life about nothing. And now you have your whole life right here. And you can choose to be a coward, or you can choose to take this challenge head on. So what I did, I can't speak for Yaru, but we both worked pretty hard. I actually resigned from my job. I was already working with kids that had severe and profound disabilities at the time I was teaching. But I wouldn't have the soul to be able to come home and put anything into Asia. So I actually stayed home and raised her for 2 years. And I never have ever attached any labels to her. And if she was here with you guys right now, you would be in love with her because she's completely her own person. She is the most emboldened, on fire. She has her friends are her peers. She is completely included. She's starting to write. She's starting to read. She's in 2nd grade. She is the Tao. And so she, at that point it was, wow. And that was 8 years ago. So now I have no choice but to be in the moment. And I could be on the precipice of the cliff. But it's always just like, it was always about projecting the worst. What if this? What if I fail this test? What if I don't? None of it ever transpired. But this was real. This was God saying, okay, here, you want to worry so much? Take this on. Here you go. And I embraced it. And it has come back tenfold on me in a good way. Because, she is, one day you will meet her. She is a classic. individual who will the sky is the limit for her, and she will. Luckily, the one thing that we seem to be able to agree on in this society is that these exceptional children all deserve resources, and so she's going to have work opportunities. She's the one I'm worried about as a teenager, to be honest with you.
Oh God.
You know, because she is beautiful. On top of that, she's beautiful, and you know, so much of my time when she was younger was spent like almost like just like laying on her, because they have like a lot, they have very low muscle tone. So I was just relentless in building her up physically. And I'm not taking full credit for it at all. But even when her mom left, I just was like, whatever. You know, I'm so proud of those kids.
Yeah, I can tell.
You know, so they just keep pushing me forward. I mean, yeah, I've been in the wilderness with a machete for a long time, but I'm chopping my way out, you know.
And you're also providing support for a lot of other people besides your children, whether you realize it or not, but I'm sure you do. And I think that a lot of people that's a great story, what you just told.
It's the truth. It's the truth.
And it gives an insight into your personality and into why you're the way that you are. Yeah. And the way that, like an interview that I saw you in, how you could be so loving to somebody.
That's right. When you said that, and that's, you know, here's the point. It's not about being loving. It's just being able to be myself.
Yeah.
Asia
in doing that, it allows all the other people that you interview to be their self.
Exactly. Well, because with Asia, what's
you.
so cool about Asia is that she truly, I mean, kids could be mean to her at school, and she might be upset that afternoon, but in terms of her memory, it's gone. So there's no, like, you know, resentment. She doesn't hold on to stuff, and truthfully, her peers respect her deeply. And so I look at it and I just say, I can just be who I am. And let it flow through me, and you look around and other people, they're like, they still look at musicians, or they're like, I'm not in awe
judgment.
I'm not in awe of anybody. I'm not in awe. Like, this stuff is like, listen, either go there with me, or then and most of the time the cats go there with. I mean, and if not, I'll take, I mean, but yeah, it was cathartic, and then that coinciding with the Tao.
Who was your favorite musician that you've ever interviewed besides me? No, just kidding. Man. But give me a favorite. A favorite.
So hard.
I know it is, but there's got to be someone that sticks out right now in the now.
Yeah.
That sticks out and says, "It was me. It was me." Whoever they are, like, was it Johnny Mathis? Was it who? Which to me is amazing that you ever interviewed him, but. Because he was amazing. But who would that be, Jake, in your...
I've done 4 interviews with John McLaughlin. And the reason... Well, I don't love John's... I'm not an obsessive Mahavishnu Orchestra fan. I Shakti or his acoustic stuff. I don't love his music. But as these interviews were profound because I was able to just surrender at a certain point, and he went there with me. Like, we were doing telephonic interviews. He's living somewhere in France, and I'm in a studio. This is when actually I was off radio. I was just doing podcasts. And I was talking to him about this magical time that I perceived to be when you were coming up as a musician in the mid to late 60s, which is around the time that he came to the United States. And he told this absolutely epic story about coming to the United States, and Tony Williams picked him up at the airport, and the next day he's in the studio with Miles Davis, playing on, I think, Kind of Blue. But what he...
wow, cool.
I'm not sure if he was on Kind of Blue, but it was one of these iconic albums. And so he starts to tell the story about Miles in the studio as a Zen master. Miles went up... And I was so... This was the first time where I really got into like this erogenous area that I was dreaming about, where Miles went up to me and said, play the guitar like you don't know how to play the guitar. And it got in John's head, like pretend like you are a novice. And he went off, I guess it was on Bitches Brew. And he went off and it was like this, it took him out of his original
Wow.
mindset.
I
And then,
love
so
this.
in our fourth interview, so then we talk, we're getting closer and closer every time, you know, and then the in my mind, one of the greatest stories truly that it sort of sticks with me is that, so he was living at the ashram. Sri Chinmoy was his guru. Okay. What he said was this in the first, he goes, Jake, he goes, everybody was doing LSD. He goes, I don't consider LSD and pot really hard drugs. I mean, compared to cocaine and heroin. He goes, but I was searching for a way in his own like sort of accent, which is not British and not, it's so hard to determine. The way he talks is so unique. He goes, I was trying to find a way to access the spiritual nature of music without drugs. And he's talked about going to the ashram and became a disciple of Sri Chinmoy, okay? And if you've ever seen John's music, you realize that he is operating on a spiritual plane. It's a conversation. It's very beautiful. But in our last interview we did last year, because of my work with other people in the band, I've interviewed the violinist Jerry Goodman, who was in the original, and Jerry told me that John called him out of the blue. He didn't know. He couldn't believe. He was living in a barn in Wisconsin. John's like, the guy with a British accent calls him. He's like, I want you to come to New York and be part of this band with me. And so Jerry told me that John had an Indian restaurant in Queens where they used to sit on the floor and play acoustic raga music, you know, just violin and guitar or whatever. So I had this background, right? And this is what I love to do and this is why I get so fired up. So I said, John, we got a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to listen to this voice and we'll come back. Actually, I did that for you. I played that, played that one about the Sufism.
Yeah.
About the Sufis. But in the same interview, I'm playing for John McLaughlin Jerry Goodman's audio sound in our interview about them telling, John's listening to a story about himself from his former bandmate about sitting on the floor of an Indian restaurant in Queens that he probably has never talked about on record ever. So we get back. I said, you know who that is? He goes, I don't know. I said, it's Jerry Goodman. I said, John, please tell me about this Indian restaurant, you know. And he proceeds to tell the story, and it's entitled "The Disciples Need to Eat." And basically, John had established himself in the United States. Mahavishnu Orchestra was starting to tour. They were starting to have commercial success. They put out an album. I mean, really serious commercial success at that time. He was still living at the ashram, and Sri Chinmoy said, you know, John, congratulations on your success, but the disciples need to eat. They don't have a lot of money, so I need you to buy or rent a space and get an Indian restaurant going and serve them vegetarian food for very cheap, $1.50, and see if you can really walk this path as you go towards this stardom or this career. Are you still honest with the spiritual nature of the whatever Hinduism? I'm searching for the right, but that spiritual nature. So what John winds up renting this Indian restaurant out, which is where they played music, but for a long time he was cooking the food. He learned how to cook vegetarian food for the disciples of the ashram for $1.50. He was losing money hand over fist, and he was going out on tour playing 4-hour shows with the original Mahavishnu Orchestra, cutting records, having monetary great success, but also losing money and exhausted on the other end. After about a year and a half, he goes, Guruji, I can't keep doing this. It's too. He goes. Sri Chinmoy was like, I think you've seen it. I think you understand. I think you've done your job. And so he wound up giving it to 2 other women, passing it on. But it's one of those stories where it's like, damn, this is what humanity is about. I mean, that's what if I could look, from 50,000 feet away and see music and humanity and spirituality all co-joining, that story encapsulates my show. where it's like you're out there, you're accessing your multidimensional self, you're having a conversation in music, you're doing it without hard drugs, and then you come back and you're of service to the people that you are also in communion with, that you are, yeah.
Explain what you mean by multi-dimensional self.
Like, so just as an example, Billy Cobham, who's another dear, and I've actually become friends with these guys. That's the coolest part of my show, is that I am not, it's not like for a lot, these guys recognize what I'm doing. It's profound. And so we're friends. And so Billy Cobham has never done a drug in his life. And he told me a story, again, when he was with Mahavishnu, with the orchestra, they were in Paris or France somewhere, and it's the end of a long tour, and it was the second set of a show, and Billy is just exhausted. He's done. He's so fatigued. He tells it a lot better than I do, but he said at a certain point, he could see himself on the side of the stage playing drums. He had left his body, and he was seeing himself play drums. And so at that point I said, and there's only two letters that separate magic and music. So the idea is when you're really in the moment and you're really lost within the conversation, you're outside of this. And a lot of the times there are things where there are times, especially in my interviews, especially with guys I've never met before, that were playing with Sun Ra in the 60s and the 50s, and it's the flow of the interview. It's like I'm already there, I'm thinking, I'm talking, and they're right with me. It's just the Tao is just at work. So I'm not really articulating it that well, but I just feel that there's many levels to our being, and a lot of people, they go do ceremonies in the Amazon with shaman, healers to experience this stuff, to experience firsthand in a group setting. Other people have different ways of experiencing the multidimensional self. Right. To me, it is vibration and rhythm and like letting the body dance. Like music has tapped into it. Sports doesn't do that.
But the consciousness runs the body.
Right.
We're going to break here for a few minutes, Jake. Thank you so much. We'll be coming back.
That's great.
In just a few minutes. And this is Jake Feinberg on the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Marla.
Yeah, love you.
I love you.